For the first time, this group is, really looking at the data and the imagery that we brought back. It'll be interesting to see what people think about it.
What's going to be good about this is now with this level of detail, what looks like chaos actually has patterns.
It's up to this team to decipher those patterns. Everyone is interested in the sinking, but in addition, each member will use the map and video for their own specialty.
Everybody's skill set and data coming together to give us.
U.S. government scientists James Delgado and Dave Alberg will study Titanic as an archaeological site.
Say, okay, this is how it's changing.
Woods Hole oceanographer Dave Gallo will examine the sea floor around the wreck. Bill Lang will concentrate on the imagery, working to create wide-angle views of Titanic that have never been seen before.
Optical mosaics.
Park Stevenson will pursue two separate lines of inquiry. One, he'll investigate the strength of Titanic's rivets. Two, he'll work with marine artist Ken Marshall and RMS Titanic historian Bill Souder to identify new pieces of wreckage.
The spatial relationships that each piece has to each other is going to be critical.
When all this work is done, it will represent the greatest body of scientific knowledge ever assembled on Titanic.
In the analysis, because it hasn't been done before, it could take months.
As the 100th anniversary of Titanic approaches, in Woods Hole, the scientists are sharing revelations from their work so far.
This is bathymetric data collected.
Oceanographer Dave Gallo leads off.
We moved into the area. We had
Studying the sonar map, he's made a shocking discovery.
These dunes are huge. That's the bow here, and you can see many of these dunes actually dwarf the ship itself.
Huge ridges of sand, not photographed, but obvious on the sonar map, are creeping inexorably toward Titanic.
These are large amounts of sand actually moving across the seafloor. So you can imagine if they're active today, one of these things could run right over the top of the Titanic debris field.
It's long been assumed that the wreck will eventually rust away. But perhaps Titanic's ultimate fate is to be buried.
Can you show the track of that dive?
Next, NOAA's Jim Delgado reports on the archaeological work to date.
Every piece of the hull has been looked at in terms of where things are located on the seabed. There are patterns.
Heavy ship parts are clustered near the stern. Lighter debris like coal and dishes farther away. They probably took longer to fall and were carried by the current.
See that the outer hull of the ship, the shell.
Now, underwater imaging expert Bill Lang presents stunning new pictures.
Finally, now we've got that wide-angle view that we've always wanted.
A look at Titanic that has never been seen until now. This incredible mosaic is 1,200 individual photos stitched together. No camera lens has ever been able to capture this much detail in a single shot. And this, the stern, also mosaicked from over 1,000 images. Where the ship broke, the main engines are exposed, each as tall as a 3-story building.
There's a pretty strong current.
To Bill Lang, these mosaics are clues about how Titanic hit the bottom.
I think what we're looking at is that the bow impacted the seafloor at the forward end and collapsed down upon impact, which caused all of this decking collapse and bulging out of the sides in this area.
How the data has been collected. So for
the science team will continue working for years to come with the data from this expedition.
That we've used several different.
Hey, Jens Parks.
Meanwhile, Park Stevenson, Ken Marshall, and Bill Souder have focused on the breakup. How did Titanic come apart? Was there a fatal flaw? After a year of painstakingly studying key pieces of new debris, the way they broke, and their location on the map, this team now believes they finally know what happened as Titanic went down. April 14th, 1912, 11:40 p.m. She strikes the iceberg. By 2:15 a.m., it's the beginning of the end. The bow pulls down. The stern rises. Funnels collapse. The ship fractures. The entire bow hangs on the double bottom. Amazingly, it holds on. Finally, the double bottom lets go. The bow heads down. It sails as it falls, taking perhaps 5 minutes to reach the bottom. The cargo hatch flies off. The structure creases and the back end collapses. The fate of the bow seems straightforward. The team believes it's what happened to the stern that reveals if Titanic had a fatal flaw. Once the double bottom releases the bow, the stern briefly settles back.
And eyewitnesses saw the stern settle back and for a moment thought, well, maybe the ship will float after all.
But it's just a cruel illusion. Now she starts down. Boilers fall out. The deck house tears off. The double bottom bends back and separates. Now, deck house and double bottom sail off to the east. The stern inverts and goes into a spiral. The tower debris and galley decks come off. Finally, it hits, blowing out the sides and top. No one can say for certain what happened once Titanic disappeared. But the team believes this scenario is supported by evidence on the sea floor. 1. The double bottom. The forward edge of the front piece is stretched, which would result from its holding the weight of the bow. 2. The profusion of debris to the right of the stern and the smearing of the mud to the left suggests the stern fell in a spiral motion. 3. The position of the deckhouse debris far to the east.
We suspect, based upon where that debris is located in the debris map, that that piece must have separated in the first large spiral of the stern section.
And there's more, the most significant evidence of all. This expedition has shown that the missing middle was not pulverized into bits, but survived as huge chunks, suggesting they broke free in giant sections. For large sections to break away intact and survive all the way to the bottom tells this team the answer to the ultimate question. Was Titanic a weak ship?
Was Titanic a weak ship? The answer that we're taking from this expedition is quite the opposite. Weak rivets, possible flaws in design. What we found has disproven a lot of that. Titanic's gotten a bad rap in recent years. Her own builder gave her only an hour to an hour and a half to live. She lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. Titanic broke because she was subjected to stresses that no structure could withstand.
But if Thomas Andrews' design can't be faulted, where does blame for Titanic lie? Captain Smith for speeding through an ice field? Reckless, perhaps, but in 1912, not unheard of.
He was following the routine at the time. It was customary for captains to proceed at their cruising speed until ice was actually sighted, and then they would take precautions.
White Star Chairman Bruce Ismay for inadequate lifeboats. But in fact, Titanic actually had more lifeboats than the law required. Experts assumed they wouldn't need to hold everyone. Radio would call other ships to the rescue.
Lifeboats are mainly to move people from a ship that's sinking to one that has come to rescue it. Another ship would pull up and you would use the lifeboats to transfer them.
But on April 15, 1912, a place in a lifeboat was the difference between life and death. Maybelle Thorne gets a seat and survives. George Rosenshine and Franz Kohlbaum do not. Captain Smith and Thomas Andrews also die. Bruce Ismay makes it to a lifeboat, but as the CEO who saved himself when women and children died, his reputation is forever shattered. Margaret Devaney ends up in the same lifeboat as Ismay. When the sailor in charge finds the oars lashed together, it's Margaret's pocket knife he uses to cut them free. In the end, 700 people made it into a lifeboat and survived. Today, lifeboat seats for everyone is the law. But what good is enough lifeboats if there's no time to launch them? 3 years after Titanic, the Lusitania in 1915, the Andrea Doria in 1956, and in January 2012, the Costa Concordia. 3 state-of-the-art ships that rolled on their side as they sank, making many of their lifeboats unusable. Titanic remained stable for 2 hours and 40 minutes. All of her lifeboats were used.
I am convinced that no other ship then on the ocean would have performed under the circumstances as well as Titanic.
All along, we've been looking for potential flaws that killed about 1,500 people, but instead, I think we've actually found evidence that Titanic saved about 700 lives.
I think there's a lot of evidence that Titanic was built a lot better than she's been given credit for.
A century after Titanic's sinking, mysteries are solved, reputations restored, and the entire wreck site has finally been documented. Scientists and historians will study the data for years to come, and new findings will continue to emerge. But thanks to this team, the world now knows more than ever about how this became the final resting place of Titanic.